Hi, welcome to the Alliance for Police Accountability, Black Socks, Black Men for Change, supported by The Voice debate on the new Met Commissioner, what the Black Londoners want. My name is Lee Jasper, former Senior Political Director for Policing for London, and I'm co-hosting this event today with Janet Hills. Janet.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Janet Hills. I'm a recently retired police officer, and I have a passion for policing, but also a passion for the impact that policing has on the Black community.
This evening, we're going to, can we just apologize for starting late? Because I know we're a few minutes behind, but there's hellish travel conditions as a consequence of the travel strike tomorrow. People are getting home early, so it's caused all sorts of problems. Apologies for that. But what we'd like you to do is share your link online for the YouTube and Facebook MediaNet Live channels, MediaNet Live. Share it with your friends, tell them where it is, get them online. We'll be taking your questions live as well as posing questions to our wonderful panel here this evening. And it's really the focus is on how do we get the kind of commissioner that London needs for the 21st century. So without more further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panel who have assembled here this evening. Well, there's a slight delay in introducing the panel, so I will continue. But this event really relies on your interaction and involvement, so do get in line. Do get online, do ask us the questions. And of course, Janet, tell them a little bit about yourself, because you got...
I'm amazing, right?
You're amazing, amazing.
So, as I said, I'm a retired police officer. I did just over 30 years in the Metropolitan Police Service, and I retired as a detective sergeant. And prior to leaving, I was the chair of the Metropolitan Black Police Association. Tonight, we have the new chair, Chris Excel, who is going to be paneling the views of internal staff and officers in relation to this big question about the new next commissioner. And that's also the national president from 2015 to 2017. So I've got quite a big catalogue and a big career in policing, and I still look so young, right? Yeah.
I'm giving her that compliment. But yeah, and as for me, people will know my history in terms of campaigning for racial justice and equity and advocacy on behalf of our communities now for the last 35 years. Can we just thank our sponsors this evening? Sponsors are Black Socks, the social movement, Black Men for Change, who've come together to help us finance the event, and The Voice newspaper. Now, the editor of The Voice newspaper, Lester Holloway, was supposed to be with us this evening, but because of the travel difficulties, and we're finishing so late tonight, he couldn't get home tomorrow, and he lives out of London. So unfortunately, we've had to take his apologies. But the good news is he wants to do another one of these debates, and so we'll be working with him, and he'll join us further down the line. So I think without any further ado, I can go to the panel and do some introductions. So the debate will be from 8 until 7 until around 9. We'll finish sharp at 9. We've got an illustrious panel, and let me start over here, if I may, with the senior ranking person on the panel, Leroy, only in age, Leroy Logan, MBE. Of most of you will know his life having been immortalized and memorialized on the Small Axe series. Thank you for joining us, Leroy. We'll come to you shortly. Next to him, wearing the black with the Nike logo, sponsored by Nike, is he's going to cover it over that. Jermaine Jackman, who I used to name wrong for years. It's taken me until at least 60 to get his name right. But an inveterate activist, entrepreneur, a social influencer, absolutely out there with our leading generation of new black talent. Welcome to you, Jermaine. Next to him is Emmanuel. Tell me your surname so I can pronounce it. Anapo. Did I say it right? Because I got a Mancunian accent, so I can murder the English language. So I really have to practice. But Emmanuel's from Hackney Account Stop and Search Group, and they've been working with the Alliance of Police Accountability, which I'm going to tell you more about. around the issues of stop and search, particularly in Hackney, and they developed a really great resource, which is an expert handbook around stop and search, and we'll say more about that. Next, Emmanuel, is Patricia Lamour, MBE, educationalist, feminist, activist, entrepreneur, leader, mother, all-round fantastic individual who will be joining us, particularly to talk about young women and girls and the gender issues that this new commissioner needs to be aware of. Next, Patricia is another one of our young leaders, Chris Excel, who's the newly elected chair, barely 4 months old, Leroy. So he's really young in the job, but he's the new chair of the Met BPA, the Black Police Officers Association. He's joining us. He's also on the steering group now of the Alliance of Police Accountability. So welcome, Chris, and we look forward to hearing from you. And finally, but not least, is Abby. Now, Abby, your surname is Johnson. And Abby is the chair of the, let me get this right, the Independent Office of Police Scrutiny. Is that right? The Independent Office Scrutiny and Oversight Board. There's one of the things that this commissioner must be committed to, and that's abolishing stupidly long names for very simple committees. So we'll vote on that later on. Abby is doing a fantastic job, recently recruited to by the National Police Chiefs Council in relation to holding national police forces across the country to account. And there's been some interesting developments this week, which we'll no doubt come to. So, having introduced you to our megastar panel, and it is a megastar panel, I'm going to give you back to Janet, because she's going to lead off with the first of our questions. Now, bear in mind, please use the hashtags, hashtag NewMetCommish, COMMIS, NewMetCommish, hashtag APA. So NewMetCommish, hashtag APA. And then when we get to the questions, make sure you include those hashtags in your questions, whether on YouTube or on Facebook, so that we can generate the questions here and we can pass them on to our panelists. You may say, what's the point of this debate and where do we go from here? Well, from here, we'll be writing to the Mayor and the Home Secretary with our suggestions about the job description and the recruitment process for this new commissioner. And there's a very complex process led by the Home Office, involving the Mayor and indeed the Queen. The Queen actually appoints the new commissioner, which may surprise some of you. But that's the process. We'll be having a delegation to see the Mayor and the Home Secretary to pass on all of the views that are raised here tonight in relation to what we think the new commissioner skills and experience should be. So having explained that and said that, over to Janet.
So, panelist, our first question, which could be an easy one or it could be a difficult one, depends on what you say. Is the Met an institutionally racist organisation? Yes or no, and why? Who would like to kick us off? Off you go, Leroy.
Right, yeah, well, I believe the Met is institutionally racist. Myself and two other members of the Black Police Association gave clear empirical evidence when we gave oral and written submission to the Macpherson inquiry in 1998. The disproportionalities internally as well as externally was clear evidence, and it hasn't really changed since then. So if it walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it's a duck.
And I would ask then, what evidence would you put forward to support that there has been no change?
Hardly any change in terms of stop and search. In fact, in some ways, it's got worse. The 9 to 10 times more likely to be stopped if you're black than you're white. And if you look at Section 60 roadblocks under the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, it's even over 20 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're black than you're white. And the use of force, the excessive use of handcuffs, even before an officer has reasonable grounds, that is a new development, especially with this current Deputy Commissioner, Steve House, and it's a breach of the codes of conduct and I think in flagrant abuse of people's human rights. So that in itself, in terms of stop and search and their powers, and of course, use of tasers, the DNA database, 80% of people on the DNA database are black than white. Matrix, 80% of people on the Matrix is black than white. What's happened to the white gangs? So I could go on just externally, and then internally, we're still seeing black police officers and police staff hugging lower ranks, and they're 5 times more likely to be subject to discipline compared to white counterparts, especially at the senior ranks. And of course, we've only had one black chief constable, Mike Fuller, 2006 to 2010 in Kent. And there hasn't been a sniff of anyone even going near chief constable status.
Okay, thank you. That's quite a bit of evidence there that you've put forward. Emmanuel, in terms of stop and search, how do you see the organisation, the Met Police?
I think when you look at stop and search, that happens within the black community. We are over-policed and underprotected, and we see that within the stats continuously every single year. The stats that the police produce every single month continuously shows that black people are stopped disproportionately compared to our white counterparts. And also another issue that we see as well is that we have a police force that is very punitive when it comes to black people. There's over excessive force when it comes to stop and search when compared to white people, and yeah, that's how I'll sum it up.
So would you say that the police should stop using the power, which is Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act?
I think when we look at stop and search, right, and when we look at, let's say, for example, in the corporate world, if something doesn't work, they will abolish it, right? They will stop, they'll remove it. We've seen countless amount of times that stop and search is not bringing crime down. If anything, it's exacerbating it. People don't trust it within, there's lack of trust within the Met, and that's just proven, and yeah.
So just in terms of solutions then, what would you offer as a solution to stop and search?
I think we need a health, what is it?
Public health?
Yeah, public health approach to policing. When it comes to policing black and brown communities, I don't think more black and brown police officers is actually going to stop the issue from happening. We've seen how many officers that are black and brown be in high positions within the Met, and nothing has really changed. And yeah.
So interesting, which leads me and draws me into Chris in terms of the internal staff. How do you see it? Emmanuel is saying that more recruitment of black and Asian officers is not going to change the dynamics. How do you see it?
Well, I think I'd agree. It's not necessarily, it's not just about the makeup. I think there are other people who have given comment who would say, actually, we're not saying abolish stop and search. We're just saying do it right. So, we're talking about the courtesy, the professionalism, the proportionality, etc., which would go quite a ways to, I think, improving that confidence and trust. But with an absent, if we're talking about, if there's that disparity, that discourteous behaviour, all that kind of stuff that people complain of, then the question after that is, well, what else are you gonna do or say in front of me that your supervisor would say is not okay? What else are you now going to try and get away with? And it's those instances that affects people's trust in what actually, to a degree, can be an effective tool for taking weapons off streets and saving lives. But it's just about getting it right, and we're not really there. There are officers who witness that. There are officers who are subject to stop and search, clocking off work and on the way home. People have complained about that before, and the grounds around that and how the interaction's taken place, only for officers to find out later on or at the end that actually they've inquired or searched an officer. And not necessarily whether they would do anything differently all of a sudden, but it just lends to that. It lends to the question around the confidence of whether we're actually doing it right. And I don't want to say evidence-based, but based on those objective facts, those grounds, etc. So, in a nutshell, that's the vibe internally. It's not about abolishing it. I don't think anyone's saying that. It's just about getting it right.
Okay, so in terms of the institutional racism tag that goes with policing, do you see the use of stop and search as a systemic problem in policing?
So, as chair of the BPA, I speak on behalf of members who feed in stuff to us. We exist as the voice of communities and our staff as well. And I think that there is, there is an issue. Just remind me where we're going with the question again.
So it was just to understand whether you felt that stop and search was systemic, part of the problem.
So I think there is feedback around the perception, the threat assessment, all those things that lend to the disproportionality of the use of force and going straight for certain tactical options when using force, etc. That can include handcuffing straight off the bat. It might be something that one person from one culture doesn't understand. So potentially what might be the flamboyance or the waving around of hands or the loud the loud voice or certain cultural things that actually, if people aren't used to, all of a sudden they say, oh, I see that as a threat, when actually it's like, no, that might just be how certain people talk. I mean, going Sunday dinner at my house, a Caribbean house, it's all loud and it's vibrant. Someone might look at that and think, oh, that's very boisterous and all sorts, and all of a sudden, but then your perception is different. So with us being a minority in the police service, then actually if the majority is seeing things in a way that the question mark creates the fear, creates the threat perception, and therefore some disparity, then that suggests that something within the institution isn't quite right. So yeah, systemic.
Okay. And solution?
Solution is, I think, it's a willingness to acknowledge and then understand. Even if you don't understand it, have the acknowledgement. There are culturally competent colleagues, culturally competent communities who are willing to help. It's just that acknowledgement in the start, which will probably feed into what we talk about later about the new leadership. That's where we've got to start with it. So,
Abby, in terms of your new role as part of the scrutiny board, I know that there have been some headlines around institutional racism and the acceptance by the NPCC, which is the National Police Chiefs Council, around accepting that term. What is it that you feel the board can do in terms of that term, which seems to be a bit of a niggle for officers?
Yeah, I think that one of the issues around discussions pertaining to institutional racism is that people don't go back to the definition. Instead, they have this very kind of visceral, emotive reaction, and they then base the conversation around how it makes them feel to hear the word racism, for it to be associated with the profession that they belong to, and there's a nervousness to align themselves with that. But if you actually go back to the definition of institutional racism, I think it's a very soft term, actually, compared to the type of racism that policing is quite happy openly to accept. I find it quite strange that leaders in policing are happy to say that there are people who were police officers, who are and maybe will be police officers, who are overtly racist. That there are people amongst their number who would use the N-word. There are people amongst their number who would outwardly say that they think that people who have our skin colour is inferior to them. But what they won't say is that there are processes, procedures, that there are cultural issues that allow that kind of attitude to fester within policing, or at the very least allow it to go unchecked, and that it reduces the desire or the will of others who see those incidents and want to say something, but don't have clear processes by which to escalate those matters. So I find it really strange, actually, that for me, policing would accept the aspect of racism, which is the most egregious aspect of racism, but then won't accept the parts that they can change very easily, I think, if they were to dig into it. So the definition of institutional racism is from the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry report, where Sir William Macpherson spoke about the collective failure of an organisation to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their colour, culture, or ethnic origin. And he said it can be seen in the processes, attitudes, behaviour, which amounts to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, racial stereotyping. So he actually was talking about the stuff that people often aren't aware of. He was talking about the fact that you can, without meaning to, magnify racist attitudes. And I find it very strange that that's treated as a controversial term. So one aspect of the work that my board will be doing is making sure that the plan of action, which is being created by the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing, doesn't look at racism in isolation, that it looks at it in terms of its position as an organisation, in the way that it works institutionally, in where policing sits in the structure of society. The fact that a lot of these issues are then magnified because of the underfunding of other areas, the fact that mental health provision is so low, the fact that we don't have a lot of social welfare provision anymore compared to before, the fact that we see people from black backgrounds being excluded from school at much higher rates. Those are aspects that we ought to see the police actually identifying as things that make their job much harder, and identifying those as things that cause them to creep in their competence into areas that policing wasn't created for. So if policing were to get ahead of the vocabulary around racism, actually they would make their own jobs much easier, because it would help them to acknowledge where they ought to sit in society and the other organisations that ought to be feeding into the work that they do, as well as highlighting the fact that even if you are a good police officer who is working to the best of your abilities to be anti-racist, you're ultimately not supported by a system that helps you along that way. There is a system that stands in that way. And speaking to a lot of the, for example, the BPA, local and at national level leaders, a lot of the work that Black police associations do is support officers through experiences of racism within policing. And like Leroy has highlighted, the stats demonstrate that racism is a real issue amongst policing. So I just don't see why it's a problem to even acknowledge the extent of the issue before dealing with it. But that does need to be done, and that's what my board will be pushing for.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any other comments from the panel in terms of yes?
You know what? If you really want to bring about change, it's not just about evidence. I mean, all the stuff that Leroy said is so powerful. We just kind of like skated over it. You know, how many times do we have to regurgitate this kind of disproportionality? It's not about evidence that brings about change. It's when there's too much pain or shame publicly. For instance, when I heard about Sarah Everard and the whole of, you know, white and black women getting excited about how this has, you know, destroyed the trust of women in the, I thought to myself, well, this is where we've been for how many decades as black people? I mean, what about Terry Gross? What about Cynthia Jarrett? You know, this should be part and parcel of the police training for them to really understand the trust of black people in London matters, and it should matter to the police. We are not the ethnic minority. I'm waiting for the census to come out and to just destroy this 14% that we're dealing with here. We are, you know, given white flight as well, we are the global majority, black people. So if we, you know, racism is systemic. It means that even if you just do your job and you do not outwardly hate black people, you will have the statistics that we have. This is the same in education. Everybody's just doing their job and the black children are failing, they're being excluded. So this is more than this. So, you know, I can just tell you straight away, a commissioner that we need is someone that actually recognizes the problem. They recognize there is misogyny, they recognize there is racism, because you don't even recognize it. How are you supposed to do anything about it?
Thank you. Jermaine, do you have any comment on the organisation being an institutionally racist organisation?
Just to add on to Marty's point here, it's about accepting the problem too. I think too often politicians and those in high places like to recognize, well, that might be an issue of my organisation, but it's not for me to deal with. We had Cressida Dick time after time who said, calling my organisation institutionally racist is unhelpful. You had cries from the black community. And I'm not here to try and compare or contrast case by case, but it took for countless officers who have been found to be homophobic, to be found to be sexist, misogynistic. It took for the case of Sarah Everhard and the pressure that we had to put on the police officers about Libra and her sister in the
I'm
car
telling you.
for Cressida Dick to stand down. Amanda and I, 2 years ago, stood in front of Scotland Yard protesting for Cressida Dick's resignation. The Forefront Project, countless, year after year, have called for Cressida Dick's resignation. So this is far bigger than just Cressida Dick. This also lands on the Mayor of London too. Because if just like that, he can say I have no confidence, just like Boris Johnson did with the former Met Commissioner. She could have been gone. But cutting the head of the snake does not deal with the root causes. And I think this leads to the second question that we're asked is, what are those characteristics that is required of a Met Commissioner? And like Auntie said, these are systemic issues. And with systemic issues, you require a systemic thinker. Someone who's strategic enough to understand the pain of the past to inform the changes needed for the future. Radical and bold and brave steps needed. So I'm not calling for the abolition of stop and search, but I'm saying a massive overhaul and using evidence and using experience, listening to communities, hearing their pain and their struggle, but also hearing the solutions that they have. We have the solutions right here. The most marginalized communities have the solutions, and once you cater for the most marginalized, you cater for it.
Absolutely.
Chair,
Lee.
can I just say one thing that
Yeah, go ahead.
really needs to be highlighted here? I don't think, whether we get a new commissioner or not, they're capable of being left to deal with institutional racism, whether it's acknowledging the term or actually showing the ethical leadership. Because what it really needs is culture change. So it's not just, and I take the point that Jermaine said, when you cut off the snake, you've still got the problem. So it's culture change is critical. One of the things we saw 10 years after the report of the McPherson recommendations was the introduction of independent oversight. And we had a political will of the Labour Party because Jack Straw himself chaired the Stephen Lawrence steering group, and it held every chief constable around the country to account. So just like they would get phone calls for why is your murders going up or your robberies going up, whatever, they would get a phone call about issues of trust and confidence and service deliveries, all the powers and the internal dynamics. We had recommendations around recruitment, retention, progression. So they would get a phone call. So that's everyone sits up when they get the phone call from the Home Office, whatever. So I truly believe the new commissioner has to acknowledge it's not his or her gift, or even the management board. They need to bring in independent oversight, which I think could draw in the work that Abby's doing with ISO to hold chief constables to account. But the issue is, even now, they've been reported that chief constables are pushing back, saying we're not accepting it.
Well, we're running ahead of ourselves on the debate, and you all want to get to the end before we've even explored some of these issues. In relation to institutionalization, my take on institutionalized racism has always been, if an institution is institutionally racist or sexist, it requires that institution means to be disassembled and reassembled, giving it more equitable balance and accountability to communities. So if you look at the Royal Ulster Constabulary, it's a pity that Andy George is not here, he would have spoke about this. The Royal Ulster Constabulary had a horrid reputation in Northern Ireland for very good reasons amongst the Catholic community. It couldn't be reformed in the end. It had to be recreated as the police service for Northern Ireland. Since the recreation of the Royal Ulster Constabulary into the police service of Northern Ireland, violence has dropped dramatically, not only as a consequence of that, but the Good Friday Agreement and other elements. But what they recognized is that the Royal Ulster Constabulary was so toxic that it couldn't be reformed. So that they recreated it, giving independent oversight in the Constitution, in law, not as a grace and favor, your favorite black person comes and have a cup of tea. And that made a big difference. So, you know, I know, Leroy, you said before, you can't reform the Met. You need to completely recreate it as a new entity that has a greater, the issues of disciplinary need independent oversight. The issues of promotion need independent oversight. The issues of training need to be independent oversight. All of these issues that we could make would give a better balance of equity between community and police. Jimmy,
Yeah, just to jump
I'm going into the second question because we're moving on. I want you to answer: was the mayor right to express his no comfort? You've already answered, so don't worry. And was the mayor right? Yeah, was the mayor right in his assessment of Cressida Dick? Because I thought she was a failure, and like Jermaine has been campaigning, among many others, for a resignation for a number of years.
I'll move on to the next question.
Yeah. Yeah. Was the mayor right?
Oh,
Yeah,
he was right. I'm just upset that it took so long.
Exactly.
yeah. Because she only got a contract renewed 2 years ago.
But this is the thing. It's taken so much pain, so much suffering. We had the pandemic where it showed young black men were fined disproportionate rates
Massively.
than any other ethnic group in this country. Now, I don't want us to start spelling out facts and statistics because we already know it.
Yeah.
I think that our mere experience, the deaths of young black men and young black women, and how they've been treated. I will always remember Rashawn Charles and the anger that I had when I was campaigning and protesting on the streets of Kingston High Road, and how I just felt my emotions were just dismissed.
Yeah.
And how my experiences were just dismissed. I remember writing open letter to Sadiq Khan, calling for him to sack Cressida Dick. But it was kicked down the road. There was more pain, there was more struggle, there was more strife.
Can you get away, as these officers get away with abusing black people routinely, right? And action is only ever taken when they do the same thematic coming through around Sarah Everard, as a contrast to Nicole and Bibba?
Well, current news will tell you that your statement is correct. It has taken months since Sarah Everard.
So the mayor jumped on the issue of Sarah Everard, but didn't jump on the issue of racism as it affects black people.
I definitely feel like by using an intersectional lens, yes, he jumped.
Yeah.
With the violence against women and girls, he didn't feel like Cressida Dick was doing enough in the Metropolitan Police to build trust and confidence. But when we look at trust and confidence with the black community, that has been ongoing time and time again. And I said on a panel recently, if you look at some of the images of protests and demonstrations and cries out for help and handcuffs while being stopped and searched and knees on our backs, they replicate the images that we see 30 years ago. Well, not 30 years old, but I was seeing 30 years ago and 40 years ago on these streets of London. And I think and this is the point I want to say, if we think about the beginning of the Metropolitan Police, it was created to protect the wealth of slave traders along the Thames. If you have that as the root, just like how the US police departments across America were developed from slave catchers, you have that as the root. Who are they protecting and who are they serving? Who are they there to look out for?
It's a good
if
question.
That is the root of your creation, no wonder we're in this mess. So you're right to call for a whole reform of the police service, break it down to its bare brick and build up from the bottom up once again.
What do you think, Chris? Was he right to call time on Cressida?
Really difficult question for me, being part of having a foot in both camps. I knew you were going to come to it.
I can pass.
No, I think I'll abstain from what I think whether right or wrong.
Okay.
But I think potentially is that up? I think potentially it's one where look, with the size of any organisation looking forward, when you're removing the big boss, it's more about what happens now essentially, and why this meeting's here.
Yeah.
Potentially, Met could just end up in a complete flat spin because we've lost our leader. But it's like everyone said, it's not just about one person. It's about the leadership team that surrounds it, that has surrounded her.
Senior management team at Scotland Yard. Abby, what do you think?
I think that Sadiq Khan is the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. his job is to hold the chief constable to account.
Not many people know that, you know.
People don't realise that. People don't realise that when you vote for the Mayor of London, you are voting for the person who is ultimately going to have the power to say yes or no to the police chief. And obviously it's slightly different in London because you also have Priti Patel that has input into that situation, given the remit of the Metropolitan Police and the national portfolios that they have. But if he sensed that people in London were getting sick of these stories that we were being bombarded with about the Metropolitan Police, then of course he was right to say to her, and you know, it wasn't as though he just did it overnight. It took ages to do it, like it's been highlighted. We've heard that he had conversations with her where he said, I want to know what you're going to do about this problem. I want you to acknowledge the extent of this problem. And that she came back to him and he said, that's not good enough. And he didn't, let's also not forget, he didn't fire her. He simply said to her, I don't trust that you're going to do this. And rather than her saying, let me find another way, let me do more, she said, fine, I'm going to quit. So I think that's actually quite interesting, isn't it? That
I don't think he can fire her. In fact, I know he can't fire her.
So he can't fire her, but the way that it's being displayed is as though he did.
Yes.
But in reality, what he did was he said to her, this is the extent of the issue within your remit. What are you going to do about it? Then she said something. He said, I don't have confidence that you're going to follow through with this. I don't have confidence that you understand the nature of the problem. And her reaction was to resign. So I think that's very telling in terms of what was going on. But, you know, going back to what's been said before, I think one of the issues is people are so used to seeing black pain. People are so used to seeing
acclimatized to it,
suffer that it doesn't have the same impact anymore. And I had this, like with my friends and discussions that we had, you know, they put up their black squares on social media and they did the whole, hey, I'm just checking in after George Floyd. But the nature of the reaction that they had to Sarah Everard was very different to the reaction that they had to George Floyd. And that's not me saying that they are bad people. That's not me saying that they are people who have racist sentiments. It's me saying that as humans, the fact is, until you see something happening to someone who you can directly relate to, it just doesn't impact you in the same way. And that's why when it comes to pushing for change, when it comes to needing our pain and our suffering to be prioritized, it has to be somebody who understands the fundamental nature of the problem. Because we are, in this country, like maybe not in London, but at least like nationally, we are unfortunately a racially minoritized group. So if you're going to look at things democratically, they'll gender than the issues that we face. But if people were thinking about this logically, if you were to listen to black people when we highlight the issues that we are concerned with, we are literally the canaries in the mine that tell you where things are going wrong. The Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which, you know, revolutionized so many aspects of policing, that came about because of the issues that black people were raising. That is the reason why the reforms that have taken place in policing so far, it's because of the blood that we have shared
in 81
and because of the issues that we have had. And so if people were to just listen to us when we raise the alarm, then who knows what could be prevented for the rest of them. But they don't see it that way. Like, people see it as us complaining, or, you know, they kind of nowadays they say, oh, let me be your ally, let me help you through this. It's like, I don't need help. I need you to change the system. I need the system to recognize that this is an issue that is above individual action, and it's something that needs that transformation in order for things to move forward.
Good. Well, thank you for that. We're going to go to the audience for a little while. In the meantime, what do you think about this question? We're going to come back to you on what are the most significant challenges facing this new commissioner. So give me one each. But before we come to you on that question, and while you allow you to get your thoughts in concise manner, let's ask the audience if they have any questions that or statements they'd like to make to the panel. I know you were very eager because I could hear you talking while we were on. Do you want to say a few words? Introduce yourself.
I'm Divine Tete. I'm a researcher for Hackney Account. I'm a researcher for Hackney Account. We're a stop and search monitoring group in Hackney. What you said about picking up the new commissioner is really important, because I looked at Novara Media and they were looking at the candidates for the commissioner, and I'm not too confident in terms of how Priti Patel will actually choose the commissioner, because that commissioner has to understand our pain in the community, our lived experience, because there has to be community healing. And if they get in another commissioner that was the same as Cressida, you know, there'll be no job done. You know, so it's important that the new commissioner has to understand our lived experiences in London and stop the police ban and stop the Section 60s and the racial profiling when they say suspect profiling.
The more we talk about this, I don't think there's an individual born alive who can do this job. But let's see. Courtney Brown from Father to Father, you do a lot of work with young people out there in Hackney, sir. What do you think about what we've heard? What did this new commissioner have to do?
Thank you, Lee. I think the new commissioner has to, like the panel says, understand our pain, our lived experience, and so forth. I think also in terms of when I think about my dad, Tottenham, and everything like that, mental health and everything else needs to be, the training needs to be there as well, especially with young people with SEN as well. That needs to be taken into consideration. So it needs to be somebody that understands the community to be able to move forward.
Powerful position. Coming to you, Ros. I'm keeping hold of the mic just because it's COVID secure, and I don't want to be passing you around if I've got anything. So bear with me if I hold the mic, not being rude. But Ros, what do you think of what you heard so far?
I agree with everything that the panel has said. It resonates with my thoughts. I think I would add that the new commissioner needs to listen and act, and also include the community that they are serving to be part of that solution, because it's about the collaborative effort. So that is the approach, not the silo, because there's lots of organization doing bits and pieces, and quite rightly so. But I think the collaborative approach is what I'd be looking for from the new commissioner, so that the people who the communities in which they're supposed to be serving are part of that solution, so that they can be seen as a stakeholder in decisions going forward.
Some great points there from the audience. Thanks very much. I shall come back to you guys a little later in the second half of the show, so don't worry. We asked you a question before we went there, which is, what are the most significant challenges facing this commission? I'm going to start with you, Pat, if I may. Patricia Lamore, MBE. I will repeat everybody's name for a few times on the panel, because if people miss the beginning, they might not know who's speaking. So, Patricia, significant challenge.
The significant challenge is the paradigm shift, because you see, the thing about racism, I think the humanity of Black people has been put in question. Basically, at its very root, we're not seen as equal human beings. And because of that, therefore, our pain doesn't matter, our lives, hence we've had to say Black lives do matter. So on the one hand, I think listening is very powerful if you listen to understand, as opposed to just listen to let them get it off their chest and you just go on about your business. The other thing is, I thought the police are supposed to use their detective skills when they're looking for crime, and not just round up people. Like, for instance, joint enterprise, for an example. Joint enterprise, it seems to be, it's not a criminal justice system, it's like a criminal just us. You just round them all up. I said, what has happened to intelligence-led policing? You look for clues, you follow up leads, you investigate people, you ask the right kind of questions. You don't just ignore evidence or remove evidence. Do the job properly. I mean, it's not an easy job being a police person. I mean, people don't willingly want to call a policeman now, do we? Or a policewoman. It's when things all go wrong and we're looking for redress, we're angry, we're upset, law has been broken. So everybody is, it's not easy. But on top of that, when you hear the miscarriage of justice time and time again, when we call on the police to do their job properly, it's not done, and then it's all swept under the carpet, of course we cannot have trust. So therefore you need someone who doesn't only talk the talk, but walks the talk.
I hear you. Manuel, you're a young person. What would you say is one of the significant challenges facing whoever gets this job?
So I would think the number one thing that is a challenge for the next commissioner is trust and confidence, really. When we look at policing, or in fact, when you look at politics as a whole, in this country, it's very castle. We focus on punishment. We look at the gang matrix, for example, like they literally put victims of knife crime on that list. There's several cases of people. I know a case of Awate. He has been over policed.
Just let me explain, because The Matrix is not the movie. The Matrix is a database which the Met have, in which it's like a pre-crime scenario. I don't know if people have seen that movie, but they actually say this person is in a family or associated with somebody who's been in crime, and therefore we're putting in him or her on that watch list. And as a consequence of being put on the Matrix, they're then fed into discussions with local authorities about their housing or restrictions on their liberties and movement, even though they themselves have not yet committed a crime, as far as I understand it.
100%.
And further, that the Matrix has been legally challenged. So the Matrix database has just had to be cleaned by all names of people who haven't committed any crimes after an instruction from the European Court of Human Rights. So that's the Matrix, just so that people know where you're talking.
100%.
So you think trust and confidence is the number one issue?
100%, yeah.
And what would they need to do about it?
I don't think, honestly, to what I think, I don't think the commissioner could really do it on her own, to be fair. It will take a whole upheaval of the whole political system. Like, we focus too much on this country on punitive solutions to social issues, and that needs to be challenged. And I don't think she can do that alone, but yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, and just off the back of that, I think that bit is really important and brings in a little bit of balance. The commissioner is an individual.
Yeah.
And for me and my colleagues and other BPA members who are in the job, there will be an opportunity for us to say thank you to her for what she's done for all of us as individuals and a leader within the organisation. As commissioner and a leader, we may have been at variance in the past about actually, do we agree about institutional racism and et cetera, and we can agreeably disagree. BPA commissioner, absolutely fine. But that's a really important point, is that as there's police and staff, there's 47,000 of us. So it's not just about one person. It is strong from the top where the message has to come down and filter downwards, but you've got to get the buy-in of everybody else. So a lot of the instances that happen out on the ground, it's not the commissioner who has treated someone poorly, etc. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean that they're not responsible at the head of the organisation, but we have to have the buy-in from the majority. A lot of the work that we do, we totally recognise that we're the minority, but to bring about change and to get change, or the best chance of it coming about, you've got to get the majority to buy in, because they have to implement the changes and bring stuff around. Because a lot of the time, that's actually where it can be where a lot of the fault is.
Well, leadership is key on that.
Absolutely.
On bringing the organisation with you, if that's what you're intending to do.
So the boss and the leadership team around them, because for those who don't know, there's the structure where you've got the commissioner, assistant commissioners, deputies. You've got commanders who are responsible for divisions of London and
senior management team.
Yeah, it's a big old team.
It's a big old team.
And actually, if you went across those different individuals, would they all have the same standpoint on things like institutional racism, disproportionate use of force, etc.? So that's a really important bit. It's not just about the one individual, it's a bigger picture.
Okay, we're going to move on. We don't have to answer every question. Needs to be answered. If you can be quick, because we're running out of time.
From the second question,
Right.
I would say the backlash from the Deputy Commissioner, Steve House, I thought outlandish.
What?
Because we're hearing to them.
Could you explain what the backlash was? People will not know.
I was just going to say, basically, he went to the Police Crime Committee of the GLA to say he was going to write to Priti Patel to review the process in which Cressida Dick tendered a resignation. Now, he said or suggested that Sadiq Khan had breached some form of protocol. Now, as we know, Cressida Dick tendered a resignation before any sort of process, because Sadiq said the plan you come up around in building trust and confidence was not fit for purpose. So the outlandish activity of Steve House, Deputy Commissioner, I think is one of the biggest challenges for me personally.
Okay, I hear that.
Because I think he needs to go as well.
Well, big words here are at the APA. Steve House should get his P45 along with Cressida. maybe some other members of the senior management team. I'm going to hand over back to Janet to lead off with a few more questions, after which we'll come back to the audience, take some more questions offline and before we move on to the next phase. We're not following your agenda very tightly. It is relaxed and informal, so don't worry about that. But over to you, Janet.
So to the panel then, what in your view are the necessary skills and experience any new commissioner must have? Who wants to kick that off? Off you go, Jermaine.
It was raised before, but the ability to listen. Like, when we think about politicians, those in high places, nowadays, they just want to hear.
Does it have to be a policeman?
Sorry?
Does it have to be a police officer?
No, anyone.
So a private sector individual could apply to be commissioner?
You're talking about the skills necessary.
The skills, yeah.
Yeah, let me just finish
Okay.
my question, my answer on the skills. So we are living in a time where nobody wants to listen anymore. We like to hold those virtual meetings and bring young people into their spaces, community groups, and thank you for your feedback. But we're not listening. The decision makers are no longer listening. And we need people who are prepared to open their ears, take out the wax, because some of them do have nasty accents, and actually listen. Listen to what communities are saying. Listen to what young people say. A commissioner who has the ability to understand their power within an unjust justice system. Understand, although yes, they are the leadership, they are the head, and it requires more than just the head. But it's like a plant can face the sun, the head of the plant can face the sun in order to feed the whole plant. The head of the Metropolitan Police to face what it needs to face in order to deal with what's in the organization. And what do I mean by that? If you have a plant that's rotten from the roots, and you're still feeding the plant, even though it's rotten, the plant will continue to recreate and reproduce the oppressive behaviors that we see in the streets of London, right? So if the head of the plant, the leadership of the Met, faces away from the sun and actually deals with what it needs to deal with within the organization, root out, not just kick out one or two, and then you realize it's 14 or 20, and you realize actually the whole entire force needs to be trained and go through certain experiences and be go through whatever they need to go through. Then you realize actually this is a real systemic problem. I need a Met commissioner who understands their power in an unjust justice system, who's able to listen to communities and listen to young people especially.
So we've got a commissioner that needs to listen and a commissioner that needs to understand their powers. What else do we need, Abby?
It needs to be a commissioner who is able to bring the rank and file and policing along with them. I think one of the issues that we have, and I see this a lot, like any time I say or do anything that seems criticising the police, straight away I get a wave of, backlash across social media. It's always from, I don't know if they actually are, but it's always from accounts that say that they are accounts and so on. And it's not surprising. And I think that just really highlights the vision that we have of policing, which is that it's a super defensive institution, particularly in the Metropolitan Police. And we saw it with the reaction to the resignation from Cressida Dick and the statement that went out from the Metropolitan Police Fed and so on. That the instant reaction is to say, you've said or you've done something which looks like it's a criticism of the institution, and therefore we're gonna close ranks and we're gonna kick out against you. There's very rarely any sort of nuanced acknowledgement that there is legitimacy to the criticism, whilst defending them. So, and I think that points to what we're talking about in terms of the culture and what we're talking about in terms of the fact that it's just not one person that needs to change this thing. So I'm looking for somebody who has the wisdom to bring in with them or bring in to advise them people who are not just yes men, people who are willing to actually tell them about themselves, tell them what's happening, people who are willing to go out to the rank and file in policing and to challenge them in terms of what they need to do and in terms of how they need to transform, but also to listen to their concerns and to come up with ways to engage with them and to move policing forward. And I just don't think that we have seen that. That's why I think for years, not only did Cressida Dick deny the existence of institutional racism, but the senior leaders who are feeding into her did as well. We heard Baz Javid saying quite soon after her resignation saying, oh, yeah, you know, I have seen racism in policing, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's organisational. And I was just like, I mean, that's just an astonishing thing to say. Everyone knows that there is racism everywhere. So what you're saying is you're not saying anything at all by saying that. But I thought that was very reflective of the people who were surrounding Cressida Dick and the rhetoric which was being adopted. So I want to see a complete change in the way that policing talks about itself. I want to see a complete change in the voices that are elevated in policing. And I want to hear them in real time acknowledge the problem, rather than doing what we often see, which is, you know, senior leaders saying things were really bad 20 years ago, but we're so much better now. And then you go back to what they were saying 20 years ago, and they're saying things are really bad 20 years ago, but we're so much better now. Like if you go to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry report, Sir Paul Condon, who was the Metropolitan Police Commissioner at the time there's this amazing line where he's written a letter to the inquiry, and he says basically, oh, you know, these conversations about institutional racism, they're so interesting. You've really challenged us. I accept it's more than just bad apples. He literally says, I accept it's more than bad apples. I accept that it can be unconscious decisions. It can be attitudes and so on. And then he says, but I think the term does more harm than good. And here we are in 2022, and we see rhetoric that I think is even less advanced than that. That's what's happened. So I think the reflection in policing is actually, in some ways, from the Metropolitan Police, taking a step back. And so there's so much more that needs to be done. I don't know who can do that. You know, it was interesting hearing be asked if it could be somebody who's not a police officer. I can't see the rank and file in policing respecting a commissioner who hasn't done the work that they do. But at the same time, I can't see any senior leaders in policing who haven't been through the Metropolitan Police itself as well, so who haven't had that kind of aspect within it. I just don't know who is going to be fresh enough to come in and to bring about those changes. I can't think of the person who'll be able to do that, honestly.
Okay, so there's a couple of hands up. So let's go to Emmanuel.
Yeah, I think what I specifically, I know probably if my colleagues were here from Hackney Account, they'll agree with me. I would say what we need is a commissioner that is able to keep their force accountable for their actions. When an injustice happens, wherever community it is, black, brown, or blue, we need a commissioner that is able to keep their officers accountable, able to scrutinize their own institution and do that publicly as well. And I think that's very important.
Thank you. Internally then, Chris, in terms of the skills that are needed to be the new boss, your new boss, in fact, what would you be looking for?
Yeah.
Or what would the association be looking for?
You know what, I agree with the last comments that, you know, about, I think the boss needs to continue to keep the force accountable. What we have to remember is that actually of the events that come to the fore, it's police who have investigated it after some brave cops or members of staff somewhere have said that's not okay, and we need to do more of that. And the new commissioner will have to continue to be actually fully supportive of that. Where things break down, I think, is this culture of fear that some of us have talked about, where, you know, brave to step up and challenge that stuff. For then, you know, the leadership to then support that and say, yeah, you know what, where we are made aware of this stuff, we'll call it out, we'll stamp it out, etc. The problem is what actually flies under the radar, and I think the new commissioner will need to continue with that message, with that sentiment. There has to be the buy-in from everybody else, and you know, that is the leader leading the leadership team. So there needs to be some strong leadership there. There needs to be acknowledgement of the history. There is a specific history. There's a history of hurt and pain and generational trauma that comes from black communities within London, and there needs to be an acknowledgement of that, so that we're not essentially going around in circles. I think corporate memory is a big thing. It's a big organisation, but do we actually remember the stuff that we've done in the past and the mistakes we've made? Because a lot of the time we'll sit down and say that, hang on, we had this problem 20 years ago, we're having the same discussion, etc. Corporate memory needs to be there. And again, really importantly, to get everyone behind this change, there's that bit which has me leaning towards the notion that it needs to be a police officer, because it needs to be someone who understands operationally and can lead what is, I don't want to say a rare breed of people, but you'll know that, you know, is it a job, or is it a vocation? Is it a lifestyle choice? And so there's certain people who this job, you know, draws in. Some of them have some, you know, unacceptable thoughts, beliefs, process, all that stuff. There are a lot of people who you know, are good people who want to do the job, you know, who want to do well by everyone. So it's got to be someone, I think, who's operationally savvy as well, because we've got to hit the ground running. Let's not forget that there's an early turn, a late turn, and a night duty that every single day are going out and doing stuff and doing the job, protecting people, whilst all of this stuff goes on in the background. So it's balancing all that out. It's a big job.
It's a big job indeed. So Patricia, so in terms of what Chris was alluding to, do you think that it will take someone with lived experience in terms of their skill set and what they can bring to the table to be the next commissioner?
So you need a courageous person, you need a transformational leader. The only people I know that fit that job are black women, quite frankly.
Sorry, I've retired.
Yeah. Seriously. No, really. The fact that you kept saying this culture of fear, and you really have to be brave to say the truth, that just shows you the time that we're living in. And given the power of big data and AI now, I mean, when you're talking about the Matrix, this sounds to me like, because I first came into this whole policing campaigning against sus, because my brother was picked up on sus back in 1970s. It sounds like sus on speed in AI and steroids, yeah. So that you can be criminalizing people before they've even done anything, and with the visibility of us, and it seems that racism is learned behavior. Racism is learned. When I just come from my 2-week-old grandson, yeah. So when a baby comes into this world, they're not born to hate people. We are teaching them that. And if we're not teaching them formally, we're teaching them informally in terms of the whole social media, who is considered important, who isn't. So if racism is learned, it could be that if Stop and Search is producing, it could be those are the results they want. They're not considering that this could be the results that they want the criminalization of our young black people. In the same way, our statistics in this country rival the states. Incarceration rates of black people, school exclusion rates, mental illnesses, and there they talk openly, no matter how right or left, racism. Here we're still pussyfooting it around, is it really, is it this, is it that? You have to look at the outcomes and work backwards, even if people think that they're not doing it properly. So that's why you really do need a courageous, transformational leader and a collaborator who's going to bring different people around the table to really challenge things. And as you said, we've got to hold people to account. At the end of the day, the police are supposed to serve the public. 18 billion funds the police force. 43 billion, how much? I was looking up the stats, for London alone. It's taxpayers' money. That means we pay them. So we have to hold the people to account. That's the only way that will bring about change. We've got to demand more. We've got to expect more. We can police ourselves. We can, but we've got to do, we don't have to, whenever it's unfortunate, but when I see the police en masse, I don't feel safe. That's not right. They are doing a difficult job. They're supposed to be protecting people. We should see them and say, yes, these are people we can count on in really difficult situations. But for so many of the black people, this is not the case. And we have to change that. So we need a black man.
So I think the question needs to go out to our audience.
Yeah, I think Gwenton, slowly, potential candidate in Hackney, I think, for the mayor and so on and so forth. You're here this evening. What do you think about the characteristics and skills that this next commissioner needs?
So for me, someone that I'm actually one of the founders of the London Gang Exit, which was formed in 2006 to help people exit gangs and also move out witnesses in real time, which wasn't happening. 2016, I was commissioned to train all the frontline officers in the Metropolitan Police. That's when I met people like Janet and other people from the BPA. After that, we looked at it and said, we need to train the senior team. They were very reluctant. We then had a call from Thames Valley. I went over to Thames Valley and trained the senior team in Thames Valley. And what I learned from that was, because of the old structure that is there with the Metropolitan Police, a lot of the senior staff have gone through the ranks and they thought they knew it all. And I think that was the problem, where you had a lot of them was reluctant to actually move with the times. Things had changed, but they were still set in their ways. One of the biggest problems which I've found working with the Met for nearly 18 years now is that word of, I'm sorry, I've got it wrong. And a lot of the time the police make some horrendous mistakes and they refuse to show that they're humans, first and foremost, and actually apologize. And I think that is one of the biggest problems within the police, because you could actually ruin someone's life if they're not strong enough to come back from the smear or the throwing mud at a person. And that then breeds hate and contempt from not only the community that you've traumatized by trying to ruin that individuals. It's about, how do you show that you're different as a leader? And I think I would support the next commissioner not being a police officer. And I'll tell you why. Anyone that has worked within the police or closely with the police, which I've been privileged to do and gone in many places which certain people could only imagine, the only people the police are afraid of is the professional standards. When a police officer hears that the professional standards is looking into them, that's the only time that a police officer starts panicking. And I think the commissioner needs to send that same ripple effect throughout all the ranks, where you know the minute you decide either to go rogue or not follow the rules, and there's professional standards guidance that you're meant to follow as an officer and officers. Because sometimes when people get in groups, they start misleading each other. If you knew you would get the same treatment immediately, because that's another thing, no delay, immediately you would be dealt with, I think we would see more police officers acting in the manner that they agreed to act when they signed up at Hendon or wherever else. Yeah, so what we see is a lot of people get into the job for good reasons. I've met thousands of officers, and I'm not ashamed to say the majority of them have gone in it for the right reasons, but you have a few that tarnish the reputation of the police and other good people that are in there risking their lives every day and trying to preserve and save lives. But the reason why that's allowed to happen is because the leadership is so detached from what is actually going on. And now where we've got these tri-boroughs, where we've got one commander controlling 3 boroughs, it was hard enough when one commander had to watch all his officers in his station, much less 3 different stations. It's very difficult, and it's about, how are we going to draw a line in the sand? Because that's what's been asked of us. Every time a commissioner comes, let's draw a line in the sand and move forward. But if we're going to move forward as a commissioner, you can't then make the same mistakes as the person that went before you. And also as well, if you've got people in the community feeling the same as the police officers, whether it's in the BPA or whatever organization that's set up to protect their protective characteristics, feeling the same pain as the people in the community, we've definitely got a problem.
All right, I think that, the key question is, can the Met be reformed? Personally, I don't think it can. I think you need to change it by unloading some elements of the Metropolitan Police Service, because the Metropolitan Police Service is a £3.2 billion a year empire. I think it's more than that, nearly 4 billion. And that's more than the GDP of some small countries. 147,000 staff, or 27, whatever it is. This is a massive empire. The Met is an empire. And that's why it's got a sustainability to sustain itself and resist the pressure of change. What I've seen in my time is that you don't change the Met. Sometimes the Met changes you. And the culture's that powerful that it has that potential to do that. So I think a new Met commissioner for me would somebody who would need to recognise that actually I need to disassemble the current institution and reassemble it so it has more confidence. People have got more we've got more accountability, and that's not the grace and favour of a senior officer. That is constitutionalised in law, so it's a political decision. Leroy.
They've always been talking about the Met being downsized. They've been, even before I joined the job in '83, they were always saying that the Met's too big because of its national responsibilities around terrorism, diplomatic and royalty protection. All those are national portfolios, amongst other things. So I think how the expanse of cases and the complications of them, even we talked about Matrix and all these algorithms. I really think they need to, when the new commissioner comes in, he or she has to say two things. The Met's too big. It needs to be downsized. And as a result of that, it needs to change the whole structure so that you start to get the structural change and the culture change, because you can have as many shiny strategies as you want. If you don't have that culture change, as everyone knows, it will eat strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Absolutely.
Every single time. So that individual needs to say, well, this is time for the Met to be a reasonable size organization. And even if you take away those national responsibilities, it's still twice the size as the next police service, which is Greater Manchester. So, and I really think that this is the time that the individual has to say, listen, I don't want to be set up here by having all these national responsibilities. Give that to maybe another national organization, the NCA or whatever, and get those things to someone else so they can talk about the complexities of London, and more importantly, get the ethical leadership. Transformational leadership is good, but you need to have that critical distance between you and those rogue cops, and start to ensure that whistleblowers are being responded to, because so many times bad cops do whatever they want and good cops are saying nothing. Sometimes, like the Charing Cross case, Operation Houghton, there were instances where some good cops, if they felt it was they were strong enough in character and also they feel that be supportive, they could have said, change this and have that response to help them to come forward. So I think that's the thing that really needs to be pushed. That it's not a popularity thing as well. Let me close by saying that Mr. or Miss Popular, don't apply for the job, because you will be unpopular if you're going to make the changes we require.
I think that's a given.
He needs to apply for the
We've spoken to him. I think Leroy would make an excellent candidate.
Listen, all I know is if I apply for that job, there'll be a mass exodus from the Met. All right?
That's a downside.
That'd be a bad thing.
Maybe I should consider it.
But let me move on. Let me not tempt you further on that particular point. No, we would support that. Do we need a role in choosing this next commissioner? The black communities, given the overwhelming, and I hear what people say about being racialized minorities, but in London, that's not the case. Yeah, we are like 49%. The new census is due out any day now, And I think it's going to show that we're 49, 50, probably 51. In any event, the demographics of London show it's going to be a majority black city going forward by 2040 or 50 or whenever, as the demographers say. Should the black community, given the critical nature of race and black community trust, does it have a role to play in choosing, selecting, interviewing this next commissioner? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we should be sending Abby to say, sit on the interview panel, Abby, and don't give the job to anybody who doesn't respond positively to the question of, is the Met institutionally racist and what would you do about it?
I generally think that the process should be a lot more transparent than it is. I think that when you think about the remit that and the power that police have over the future of individuals, when you think about the kind of the ability that police officers have to deprive you of your liberty, to change your ability to get housing, to move further with your life, I do think it's really strange that there isn't that direct feed-in from members of the public into who it is that will be the Metropolitan Commissioner. At the same time, I do worry because I am also very aware of the fact that, and I won't name names, but
name them.
No, I'm not going to name names, but I am also very aware of but who then chooses who from the black communities would feed into that process, right? How would we then ensure that it's the right black, because not all skin folk are kinfolk. And if we're dealing with an organisation that we're saying has these cultural issues and has these concerns around it, how do we then trust that organisation to select the right people to be on the panels, to select the commissioner? So I just think.
But that could be said of any process, Abby. Any process.
It can be.
Yes.
So
So it's not
ultimately,
unique.
I'm saying yes.
Yes.
But I think it should be opened up and it should be transparent.
Absolutely.
But then I worry about I have concerns about the mechanisms of it, and I think that it shouldn't. Like you say, it's London is this melting pot. We have high representation of people from black communities. And then there's also these other factors which are coming in, which are threatening other minoritized groups. Like you look at the protest bill, and you look at what it's doing to the traveller community. You
The
look
police
at,
and crime bill.
Yeah. You look at what's happening in terms of protests and this noise requirement. There are attacks which are happening on pretty much any group that has protected characteristics, and we are all going to be at the front end of it as people who belong to those groups. And I just think that's why it's really key in London in particular. It's this outlier in terms of how liberal it is compared to the rest of the country. Yeah. It has different priorities to many other regions in the country. I do think that there should be a much more transparent process around the selection. I know that we have that ability in terms of who we vote for as Mayor of London, but we don't have that then direct feed into the selection, and I think that should happen.
So, directly involved in the recruitment and selection of a commissioner, Jermaine.
Indulge me for a moment. Patricia spoke about the police being there to serve the people.
That's right.
And I've always toyed with this idea, just like how some other forces around the country have an elected commissioner. Why can't
an elected commissioner?
Why can't London have an elected commissioner whereby, hear me out,
Yeah.
whereby they are voted on upon the changes that they wish to implement? Or it could be in the form of the Mayor of London then has a ticket where if you vote for this mayor, you get this Met police officer, which I believe the Mayor of London should be independent anyway. I don't think there should be any political parties trying to go for Mayor of London. I think that role should be independent. I've always toyed with this idea on people go above and beyond to try and engage with communities because they want your votes. They want to ensure that they're making the changes, implementing the changes because they want to be re-elected, right? So why don't we have an election in the city of London, in London, where you vote for the Met Commissioner? And it can be anyone who can run, but obviously most people would want to vote for someone who has the experience of being a police officer. If Leroy Logan, for example, ran, I'm pretty sure he would win that election. So it's something we should campaign on. It's something we should pressure the Mayor of London to do and to potentially ticket. But what also I want to talk about is, just mention briefly, is how politicized a lot of our police officers are becoming. Time after time, I'm seeing this thin blue line brigade on Twitter who are police officers spouting far-right political views it's dangerous. We're now having police commissioners appointed by Priti Patel and an unapologetic right-wing government, which is very dangerous.
But the Tony Sewell report perspective on the issue of systemic racism.
What a way to gaslight the entire Black and Brown and GRT Irish community here in this country. What a way to gaslight them. So I'm looking at potentially campaigning for an elected position for commissioning this.
Radical
capital.
ideas
You know,
here at the APA.
I think that's such an interesting point. Do you know why I always have concerns around that? Because if you take, for example, New York, I know it's America, but if you take New York, which is a liberal state, and then you look at who they have elected as their equivalent, it's always somebody who ultimately is quite right-wing, who's quite strident. And then when you have elected officials in these types of positions, actually the movement very often is that they get more and more right-wing. Because what happens is that, unfortunately, you have public engagement is reduced to clickbait headlines.
Yeah.
And what does that become? It becomes tough on crime, tough on crime. And how do you demonstrate you're tough on crime? You increase the war on drugs. And what do we see? We see that one of the key issues that we've discussed around, racial disparity is stop and search. Stop and search is touted as though it's all about knife crime, but 67% of stops are in relation to drugs. 2% of stops actually seize weapons. It's bollocks. It's about drugs. It's about it's about cannabis possession. And I think that if you have it in an elected position, what we're going to see is we're actually going to see a push towards that right-wing rhetoric. So unless we change society, unless we actually change the engagement first. So I agree that that can be an end goal, but it feeds into how do you actually change the way that people come together to speak about these things, to galvanise, to unionise in terms of the way that they vote. Because when we look at the comparable elected officials that we do have in policing, Sadiq Khan is an outlier in terms of being a Labour PCC. The majority of police and crime commissioners in this country are Conservative. And historically in London, it's been a Conservative position. So Sadiq Khan is a slight outlier. We had Ken Livingstone and we had Lee working underneath him. But I actually worry about, and I sound terrible about it, but it's actually because I'm left-wing, because I'm liberal, I kind of, when I hear that people want to move towards elections, I have concerns, because unless we have a media that's going to report more responsibly about criminality, unless we have the vocabulary that's being used in a more honest manner around crime and policing, we're just going to see skewed results.
It's a bit like...
You're completely right to raise that point. Do you think, even though we have a capital that is centre-left in its essence anyway, and my second point was...
that we would get that right-leaning skew?
Will we still get that right-leaning?
I think there's still that potential, because...
And with crime rising in New York especially.
I think there is still that potential, because when you look, for example, at local council elections in London, very often it goes to the Conservatives. So even though it's just this very strange kind of dynamic that we have in terms of engagement. And I think that, unfortunately, traditionally, the party that is better at getting organised, at putting things together and creating campaigns and getting out there, they tend to be the right-leaning parties. Maybe actually what we should be looking at is, why on earth is anti-racism work? Why is equality politicised? Why is it something that falls along political lines? Isn't it just ridiculous that you can think if you vote a certain way, that means that you actually care about these issues? I know, so, if we're thinking about this in kind of a theoretical way, I want to dream even bigger than that. I want to dream of us having a point where being anti-racist is the starting point, and then the discussions are how you are anti-racist, not the actual premise of anti-racism itself being the controversial issue. That shouldn't even be a problem. And I think that there's a danger of it then falling into those political groups and feeding into that if you turn it into an elected position. But I totally hear what you're saying. I just think that it will actually lead to potentially to further issues. But I think it's really interesting.
Good point.
Totally interesting point. Yeah.
I think the issue about politicising equality work is that I would disagree, because if you look at the mainstream shift of diversity policy, it's been to depoliticise the issue of equality to the extent that the paradigm shift that requires one person giving up power and that power being transferred to some other marginalised group is never on the agenda. What it is a sort of kaleidoscope diversity samosa and steel pan strategy that, you know, focuses on Black History Month and a few black faces in high places. But systemic power transference is really not what diversity policy is about. Diversity policy tends to be if you have a managerial consultant who will come in, and the Met have spent millions on this, who will tell you how you organize your HR department so you get more diversity, and how you do some other performative stuff. No, it isn't. But what I'm saying is the equality movement in the UK struggles precisely because it lacks some politics, which is the paradigm route, which says in order to be anti-racist, you need to be able to give up, you need to want to give up power. And they don't, and that's resisted, which is why we end up with this second-rate diversity strategy. Jermaine, had you concluded? Shall we move on to our next question? Are you? If you're not, then carry on. Okay. You're fine.
Do we want to get a view from the audience around
Go ahead.
that question?
Yeah.
Whether you, as a black community, should be involved in who the next commissioner is. Does anybody want to answer that?
Because, like, personally, I've been to a lot of meetings with account in terms of meeting the IOPC and MOPAC, and in terms of police intelligence, I feel that they have to sort that out because they're hiring people from, you know, not in London, and they're putting them in boroughs like Hackney, and they're just causing a madness. And
so officers from Norfolk never met a black person in their life, ends up in on Brixton High Street.
That's just going to cause a complete madness in terms of how do you call it? Cultural disparity. So this is where we get the information in terms of getting the new commission. We have to teach them in terms of cultural training, so tensions can be eased.
Cultural competency.
Yeah, cultural competency. Yeah.
Wow.
Anyone else? Yes, Ross.
Yeah, I agree that the black community should be involved in the interviewing process, but not just at the interviewing stage. I think there should be a session where if it comes down to a shortlist, that they should be, how can I put it, have a session where they meet different communities from all walks of life to, let's see how they interact, let's see that engagement. And I come back to engagement is important, that you get a feel that this individual is going to be best suited to serve the communities, just communities who are just general people from the community, not necessarily into HR or anything, but just that mingling. You get a feel if that person is definitely going, and I think something like that would help to build the relationship and maintain relationship, which the Met badly needs. So the commissioner that comes in, they're going to have a tough job in building and maintaining the relationships within the black community. So I want to go pick up on a point that Jermaine made in terms of the commissioning being elected. I want to go a bit further. I think it should cascade down local, that we elect our local commissioners as well. So it should be a culture that runs right through the Met, not just at the top. Because I think that when we have that, I think I'm more towards that radical change. I don't want shiny buttons to make us feel good for a moment. But I think if we're going to really be about change, we really need to have that discussion about what is possible, so that we get the right fit. And I agree with what Leroy said, that we do need to break it down so that we can have a more closer relationship with the service that is supposed to be serving and protecting the communities. I just think that we don't have the relationship, so there's no trust, there's no confidence, and it's just them and us, and never the twain should meet.
Radical interventions there. I'm going to come to you and just one more audience member, and then we'll come to Chris for a response. Quentin.
I think we need to start as we mean to go on. So once you start with the community being embedded within the decision making of who we're going to ask to govern us and protect us and keep us safe, we need to follow that through. So it's not just the start of the process. Throughout the whole process, I think someone needs to be there from the community. We have to remember that we're also intelligent and competent enough to know who is fit for the job.
Thank you, Lee. So can we just go to Diana, who's sitting here, before we go back to the panel? You have a...
I do believe, well, I feel to myself that I don't think they look at Black people as somebody that fits into society well. I do believe that they look at us more as slaves, man. You know, I mean, you know, to even talk about who's going to commission the police or be commissioner for the police, there is too many white people in the police force. There's very little Black. They won't even give us a chance. You know, this is the way I see things. They don't look at us as somebody that fits in society. You know?
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for that. Chris, you were indicating.
Yeah, just in response to that last bit, I think the other bit of it is that actually there are people out there who don't want to join because we don't trust the processes and stuff. It just becomes this, it becomes compounded, doesn't it? There are some people, you know, retention and progression has always been an issue of Black and minority ethnic officers. Sometimes there's the exposure to practices and processes where people think, actually, do you know what? I don't fancy going for promotion. I don't fancy the top job there because I just think this isn't a place for me. So it's a really difficult bit because I think now more than ever, the Met is looking at recruiting and diversifying the pipeline, let's say. But in the same respect, it's almost like we want to recruit people for what makes you, and if we want to, the Met wants to recruit, or policing right now with the uplift. We want to recruit people for what makes you an individual, but make sure when you come in the front door, you leave it at the door, that which makes you the individual. Because we've got people just saying, actually, what's the point? This ain't for me. You know what? I can go somewhere else, and for the same amount of money, if not more, I can dodge all of that smoke. Why do I want all of that? Do you know what? No. So it's a really difficult thing. I think.
Is the turnover of Black and brown police officers disproportionately high?
Yeah.
Massive, huge. And
disciplinary as well.
And disciplinary, and has nobody in the Met ever stopped to ask why?
Yes, yeah. So Bill Morris was commissioned to do an inquiry into the lack of promotion and the over disproportionate disciplinary charges faced by Black officers.
And what was found?
Well, exactly that.
Boris found that the Met was not institutionalized racist, but they did have a problem when it came to, you know, retaining and promoting Black officers.
No, the BPA commissioned that report through Toby Harris and Lord Bill Morris, who I approached personally to do that. That was not his remit to talk about institutional racism. It was around internal recruitment, retention, progression issues. And again, that was around culture and identifying what are the issues. So, I mean, I just want to
The final report was race and faith. And in the foreword to that race and faith report, Boris Johnson declared that the inquiry had found that the Met was not institutionalized racist. Now, you and I know that wasn't even in the remit of the inquiry.
That wasn't the remit of it. So you could say that.
So you can say that,
but you know Boris is always economical with the facts.
To say the least. Okay.
So the original bit, I remember now what the original bit was.
Go ahead.
And that is, I'm learning very quickly, make notes. There was talk around the disconnect and the lack of having a voice and the opportunity. And it's just a shameless plug to say that actually the BPA, that's what we're here for. You can be a community member, you can not be in the police, you can not be African, Asian or Caribbean and still be a member of the BPA. We are very privileged to be the voice within the Met, and we, you know, one of our founding objectives is that we improve the relationship between communities and police. And sometimes it means that when we sit at the top table with management board and the likes of the commissioner, we can say, just like I'm saying here, here's actually what our members, our communities are saying, because we appreciate that people sometimes feel they don't have that voice. So that's what we are here totally as. You know, with that, always feel free to come, you know, to us with anything, and we will pass that up the chain.
Can I say, Chris, it's not a privilege to be the voice of the Met. It's necessary because the Met makes it necessary.
Oh yeah, no, of course.
Like that language around like, oh, it's a privilege to be here, etc. your seat at the
It's a
table
right.
is very much required. It's a right.
I
it's
guess
not a privilege.
I guess what I mean by privilege is we're all elected people on the executive. So
Yes.
it's my privilege that actually people think that
To serve.
Yeah, that people think I'm half all right. That actually, yeah, you can sit there and do that. So it's a privilege in that sense. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's a mandate that we have, and it's absolutely necessary for all the things that we've been talking here about today. Let's not forget this all came out of Bristol seminars in 1991. We all sat people in the room and said, why are we struggling to recruit, retain, and develop you know, black and brown officers? So
That's right.
Here we are, nearly 40 years later.
There you go.
Sorry, 30 years, and
There
we're
you
asking
go.
the same question.
Can we just say in relation to African Caribbean officers, that the level of African Caribbean officers when the McPherson report was published in 1999 was 2.4%. Today, 30 odd years, 20 odd years later, it's 2.9% in the Met, right? So we moved 0.4 in that period. Now that's not because black people haven't joined the police. It's because they have joined, but they left as quickly as they got in, because the cultural environment wasn't one that they felt, well, not speaking on behalf of them, but it's clear if they leave, it's not a working environment that they found conducive. But look, we're coming to the end of what has been a brilliant conversation. I mean, people want elected mayors. They want the Met de-established and recreated in another form. They want to get involved in the selection and process of the mayor and the commissioner. I'm impressed.
But this is good. This is people actually coming up with ideas and solutions, like was said earlier.
Exactly.
Because something that actually a senior officer once said to me is that anyone can polish a problem. Come up with some solutions and stuff. And actually, we've got them all here. So this is indicative of the fact that actually, you know what, we're here. We'll tell you what. We'll give you some options, even if they aren't the right ones. We'll give you some options for some solutions. Because at the moment, everyone just seems to be polishing the problem and sometimes complaining that we're just polishing the problem. But we've come up with a few today, which is really good.
One thing's for sure, London, as one of the world's most diverse cities, is going to need an individual of the caliber that you, this panel and the audience have described, or else London has got one hell of a problem with the level of diversity that we've got here in the capital. And we know that when London sings, the rest of the country dances. I think it was Sir Robert Mark who said, you know, the symbolic areas of Brixton, Toxteth, Moss Side, Haringey and whatever, these are symbolic areas. And what happens there has an effect and sets the tone for the rest of the country. So as we come to our final closing remarks, I'm going to ask you to start your closing remarks, starting with you, Leroy, and then moving along, and then we'll wind up, and Janet and I will give some closing remarks too. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Well, I welcome this conversation. I think it's really good that at least we're showing to the powers that be that we are conscious around what's happened in the past with previous commissioners and how they dropped the ball, especially the current commissioner who's waiting for her exit date, how she has, I think, pushed back policing 20 years because of a lack of acknowledgement of institutional denial. She was wedded to the culture in a way that absolutely fooled everyone. Because I worked with Crez. She told me to call her Crez 20 odd years ago when we were doing the McPherson recommendation, because she was part of the Race and Violent Crime Task Force with John Greaves looking into those recommendations. So I think the new candidate, whoever he or she selected, has to learn from history and learn from the experience, because we as people have been on the receiving end of over-policed and, as the young man said, underprotected. And as a result of that, we have been too patient. And I think it's a recognition that power is never given. It has to be taken. So I think these conversations, having a clarity of what we want for that individual, is a way of claiming that power and getting the person, I believe, is fit for purpose.
Thank you for that, Leroy. Jimmy.
I was going to say a joke, but I thought it might be inappropriate. Because you call her Crez, I'll call her Dick.
You're live. You're live.
Oh, sorry.
Let's not go viral.
Commissioner Cressida Dick. About 4 or 5 years ago, I held a round table with Cressida Dick, Temu Malali, the Forefront Project, and young people from Brixton. the Black Culture Archives, with the Voice newspapers support. And in that room, I asked everyone, in your time of need, who here will call the police? Put your hand up. Silence. No one put their hand up. Cressida gasped. She looked so surprised. I said, Cressida, say something. Do you want to respond? She said, well, I'm shocked. I said, so who here in the room, who would you call? My cousins, my brother, like my people, my friends. I'm like, so you don't have confidence in the police to protect you, or to serve you, or to look after your needs? Nope. And Cressida Dick was so surprised. That was 4 or 5 years ago. Pain has gone on since those 4 or 5 years. More struggle has gone on. A back and forth with communities, the Mayor of London, his action plans after action plans and strategies after strategies. Cressida Dick remained. It was there and then I said to myself in that round table in Brixton, this is not the right person for the job. She needs to resign. And it's taken 4 and 5 years for that to happen. My heart breaks for the families who have had to deal with an unprofessional police force or unprofessional officers who have disgraced the police force. But we have to face the facts. Merely changing the face of the organization won't change the organization. We have to have a systemic thinker, someone who's brave and bold, someone who's radical. Well, often when we say the word radical, everyone thinks, oh my goodness, radical. Radical means you're brave enough to take the steps necessary to uproot an organization and turn it upside down in order to be a more effective.
Paradigm changer.
100%. And I'll end with this. Our government pushes billions into not only Metropolitan Police, but police force around the world. Almost some 22, 23 billion pounds a year goes into the police force around the country. If something ain't working, I'm not saying defund the police. Well, I am kind of saying that defund the police. But if something ain't working, you have to look at alternative ways of serving and protecting communities. Look at hybrid models. And that's what I mean by thinking outside of the box and thinking radically.
I think we've got the mayor and the commissioner sitting right here. That's what I think. Yeah. Running for office.
Defund the team, bro. Yeah, we can do the ticket. We can do the ticket. Defund the police. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think when we look like when I say what is it? When I say we are underprotected and over-policed, when we talk about underprotected, we mean that our communities are not getting invested in. The same communities that rebelled and revolted against oppressive systems in 2011 are the same communities that lack funding now. If in fact, matter of fact, it's even worse. So my overarching theme is, regardless if we have a new commissioner that issues in more, critical thinking, more measures that are for the Black community, if we're not getting invested in, if the police is defunded and those funds are not reinvested back into communities, then we're going to end up in the same routine and the same issues of having social issues that are not addressed at its core form. And I think that's the most important thing that, to land on. Yeah.
Well said, well said. Give the voice of the young people a round of applause. I love this energy that we've got on the table. Patricia.
No, I was just thinking, the economic dimension and the punitive, it's not just the police, it's the whole society.
It's austerity, 10 years of austerity, cuts.
This country locks up more people than Europe.
Any of them.
Any of them. The police cannot and should not be able to brutalize Black people with impunity. One of the things that propelled me to co-chair the Sarah Reid campaign was to see how she was beaten up by a policeman for suspected shoplifting. On video, sent everywhere. The man was violent from before, so it's not just suddenly this behavior comes out. They know from before. as I said, the young people, when I asked young people here about what they thought about George Floyd, we're talking about 9, 10, 12, 14-year-olds. They were not surprised here. How is it that we're not surprised that a policeman who's supposed to be protecting the law can take our lives with impunity? Until we have the powers that be that dish out the law to people who take our lives, who are supposed to protect our lives, we know that things are never going to change. Because this is the bottom line. You cannot have people who are servants of the public, who are supposed to protect the public, deciding to attack or even maim and brutalize certain members of the public. This is not correct. And until that line is drawn in the sand, things will not change. You know, we've got to, you know, at the end of the day, because when you have people of the law acting unlawfully with respect to other people, not because we have done something illegal, but because of the color of our skin and what that has triggered in some psychotic episode or some psychological problem, this is not correct. They need help. This is a mental health issue. This is a public health issue. This, you know, and you know, we've got, if we don't sort this thing out, I can only see things getting worse.
Chris, final comments?
Come on.
We'll get there.
To the promised land.
It will get better.
All right.
We just, but something that's really important, I think, sometimes, and you know, speaking with members and speaking with communities and stuff, is that we have to manage our own expectations. We, you know, with a lot of the stuff that we're dealing in, I myself and BPA members, we see ourselves as caretakers, where we just need to leave things in a better place, because it's a long old journey, a long road. Yeah. But hopefully we can leave things in a little bit of a better position. So from my side of things tonight, there's a whole load of things here that actually are things that can take back to the organisation and the likes of management board and say, actually, do you know what? There's some options here. So you know, I came to listen, and I'll feed stuff back. Not only because that's my job to do, because you know, I'm a Southie and a Londoner through and through, and this stuff's important to me just as much because I've got family and friends and everyone who might be treated differently as well. There are systemic and societal problems. That doesn't mean that as police we rest on our laurels. We need to know that stuff and rise above it and be the the anti-bias, the anti-racist, etc., etc. So, you know, it's not so straightforward. It's not isolated, but you know, as paid professionals, I'd like to think that we strive to be better, and where we're not, the BPA will be there to help steer in the right direction.
Beat them mercilessly. Abby.
Yeah, I want to end by just saying, first of all, thank you, Lee and Janet, for chairing this and for giving us this opportunity. I think that very often we, as Black people, kind of get wheeled out to kind of just display our pain in the moments, to cry hysterically on TV and to like talk from those positions. It's a real relief actually to be on a panel where we can just get to the issue. We don't have to discuss whether our pain is true and whether, you know, so I think it's a relief to do it in that way. And I think I want to just end by saying that I hope what has been demonstrated through the conversation and through the contributions that I've been making, that you guys can trust that when I'm in those rooms where you guys are not present, I'm not diluting our views. I'm making sure that they get the concentrated version, no added sugar, as to what it is that we're feeling, what we're experiencing, and what we need from the police. And that I do think, you know, I'm still an optimist. I do think that we have this opportunity through this plan of action and the structure to actually build something radical and to force them to listen to something that's radical. And, you know, I'm a Quaker, I'm a Christian. There's part of me that's like, I do find it quite interesting how since this plan has been announced, things keep happening to push this to the top of the agenda. You know, like things keep happening to make sure that police cannot just forget about this and hope that something else takes the headlines. So I really hope to see engagement from you all, trust from you in me and in the board that I have recruited, that we will move this forward and that we will keep pushing for this to take place. I know that there's already been pushback in terms of the language and so on, but I'm still going to push for that. I'm still going to make sure that we have that avenue to get that reform. But this should just be the beginning, because I think that we're right. What we need are even more radical solutions at the end of the day, because these institutions were not built for us.
Yeah.
But until we have that, people like me, people like Chris, and so on, will be trying to make the environment more accepting in the interim until we find that new solution.
Great comments there. What do you think, Janet?
Well, it's clear from the audience and the panel that this new commissioner needs to come with a wealth of skills, not just in terms of what they can deliver, but in having a proven track record of building trust and confidence within the Black community, particularly. Does that person exist, Lee?
I think a team of them might do, but one individual, it's asking a bit much. And that's why we need systemic change, because an individual can't turn this tanker around. You need to turn it into a speedboat or a faster vehicle, but certainly not the Met tanker. Well, it's been great. And I think the thing about trust and confidence, if you go on the YouGov poll tracker, and it shows you levels of trust and confidence in London from Londoners, you'll see that the majority of Londoners think the police are institutionally racist, and the number who think it's not institutionally racist is going down, and the number that do is going up. Obviously, driven by recent events, but very interesting nonetheless. A great challenge for whoever it is that comes up. 100%. We're gonna have to wind up. Can we give the round of applause for our panel? Thank you very much. As we make our way over to say our closing remarks on the event tonight, look, I just think this is the beginning of a conversation. That's all it ever can be. But I think if you're a community out there, an organisation, and you think, you know what, we'd like to organise something along this lines, then do get in touch. Just look up Lee Jasper. All the contacts are out there, and let me know. We'll happily come along and try to assemble a panel and talk to you about your views on this matter.
Yeah, and there's also the Mayor's Office, and there's other local community activist groups. If you want to have your voice heard and be part of what you want the change to be, then get involved. That's what I would say.
And the APA, the Alliance for Police Accountability, it's a project. It's going to run over 2 years and consult African Caribbean communities in 5 English and Welsh cities. Well, one Welsh city, Cardiff, actually, in 5 cities. And over that 2 years, we're going to ask 2 questions of the Black community. What does a Black policing charter look like from our perspective? And what responsibilities do we take for the violence in our communities, and what should we do about it? 2 key questions, I think, for the next generation going forward. And as I sign off to write books in the Caribbean, this project will be a gift to the Jermaines and the Emmanuels and others as a possible framework for looking at the challenges going ahead. You've been watching Media Net Live, YouTube, and on Facebook. Let's give a round of applause to the technical guys who brought this for you. Thank you very much. Theo Ambrose in the corner there, so doing his thing. And we'll be back. Everything that we've heard tonight will be added to the consultation we've already undertaken about what should be in this new mayor's job description and what we think the mayor should be involved in. One of the key things I have to say to the Mayor of London is, why does your GLA Police Crime Committee meet at 10 o'clock in the morning? I mean, surely if you want people to attend, you should do it in the evening at 7 o'clock so people coming up from work can attend. So a big appeal out to the GLA committee to don't do it in business hours, do it in community hours. But we'll have lots of ideas around what the new process should be. And we'll be writing to the Home Secretary and the Mayor to ask for a delegation so we can communicate the views of yourselves here today, the people online, and the views of the audience. My name's Lee Jasper. You're watching MediaNet TV, live stream TV, and this has been the Alliance of Police Accountability. Peace out.
Good night.